density of hair follicles as our nearest relatives, the chimps and other great apes. That's a gorilla in the picture. But many of our hair follicles remain beneath the surface of our skin after birth. Hence, this human and her gorilla friend differ greatly in hairness. Wish I had a gorilla friend. All right, so the skin is part of a system. Do you know the name of the skin system? The blank system? That includes the skin? The integumentary system. The integumentary system. That's your skin. The skin is an organ about the thickness of maybe the thickness of a dime, or about somewhat, maybe a millimeter thick. And this shows it up close from surface to bottom. And your first ID sheet is going to be on the skin. You will have this diagram on the next test. Okay? And you'll have to be able to name all these things. So I want to go through it now and tell you what's what and what does what. Okay? Let's start at the top. The upper layer of the skin is called the epidermis. When I was a kid, we used to make fun of other kids. We'd go, "Your epidermis is showing." And the kid doesn't know anything, you know. And so he's going, "No, it's not." And you go, "Yeah, it is." Make him cry. So anyway, that's the epidermis is just the skin. So don't get upset if somebody says that to you, that your epidermis is shown. The outer layer of the skin. Now the epidermis has a bottom layer called the stratum basale. The lower layer of the epidermis, that's the part where the cells are multiplying. The lower cells are multiplying like crazy. They're going through mitosis, if you remember the biology, creating new cells, splitting in two. And so that is a living layer. It's a living layer of cells. And as the cells split, they're pushed upward. So these dividing cells push the new cells upward, and eventually the cells are pushed up, and then when they get pretty high up, about to this layer here that's called the stratum corneum. Stratum, by the way, means layer. So the stratum corneum layer here, those cells are dead because they are so far from any nutrients that they die. See, the blood vessels are down here, the blood vessels that feed the cells. And so these things are far removed from any blood vessels, and they die. And that's okay, because the cells are filled with a material called keratin. And keratin is kind of a tough material that's waterproof. It's a protein. So as these cells have been moving upward, their short life, it only takes about a week to go from the stratum basale to the stratum corneum. In about a week, the cells have been producing keratin like crazy, and their little cell bodies fill up with keratin, and it makes them waterproof, and it makes them a good barrier. So by the time they die, there's this waterproof barrier of cells on the top that won't let any water out. So your skin is really good at keeping water in your body so you don't dry out in this dry air. Isn't that great? And so this whole layer here, what kind of tissue is this? Does anyone know? This whole epidermis is a certain type of tissue that we study.
That's stratified squamous.
Stratified squamous. Do it, Michael. That's stratified squamous epithelium. One of the slides that you were looking at last week was a skin slide. And so the cells on the bottom multiplying, the cells on the top dead and waterproof. So that's the epidermis. And those cells at the very top, they just kind of flake off one by one. as the new cells grow, and they just kind of fall to the ground. Dust is about 50% dead epidermal cells, about half of dust. So you wonder why it's so dusty in here. It's all your skin falling off. Isn't that gross? The other most of dust is dust mites, which are little insect-like creatures that eat dead skin, and then they go to the bathroom, and them and their fecal components make up a lot of dust. Dust is pretty gross.
That's why you can't read.
There's also dirt and stuff from outside that blows around, but anyway. Okay, so that upper part is called the epidermis. Now below that is called the dermis. That's a much thicker layer, and all of its cells are living, and it's made of a number of things. Let's do the most obvious ones first. The hair follicles. Hair exists within a depression of the epidermis. Notice the epidermis extends this way and then kind of dips way down. And we call this downward dip a hair follicle. And it has cells at the bottom here that are multiplying like crazy that produce the hair. So a hair is just epidermal cells that have multiplied and are kind of in a different formation than the ones at the top here. They bind together with one another very tightly, and so the hair is produced right down here at the base or the root of the hair follicle, and as the cells multiply, it pushes the rest of the hair upward, so your hair grows upward and outward. The original purpose of hair is to keep in warmth. That's what our mammal ancestors used it for. But humans are smart enough to make clothes, so we don't really need the hair for warmth. So evolutionarily, we've kind of lost it over time. And the only places that we really have hair, it's used for other purposes, like the hair on top of your head is really good for keeping the sun, protecting you from the sun, you see. And that's one of the purposes of the hair on top of your head. That's why it's still there. You may have noticed some really hairy guys still have hair on their shoulders. And that's probably for a similar purpose, keeping the sun off. But like your eyebrow hair, this right here, is for keeping sweat from dripping down from your head into your eyes. So most of the hair on your body has some sort of purpose. Okay, so that's a hair follicle. Now attached to every hair follicle is a sebaceous gland. A sebaceous gland is an oil gland. See, the hair has to be kept oily or it'll come apart. And oil is squirted out of this sebaceous gland onto the hair. And so the hair stays nice and oily. You ladies probably have seen split ends before, you know, especially if you have long hair. At the end of it, where it gets dried up, the hair just kind of splits, comes apart. So that's what would happen to your hair without sebaceous glands. The oil can cause some problems. What will happen, especially in people with really active sebaceous glands, is bacteria will get down there in the sebaceous gland and start eating the oil that you're producing. And the bacteria will start multiplying. And then the white blood cells have to come through the blood vessels here and fight the bacterium. And that's what a pimple is. Pimple is an infection from bacteria that are in your sebaceous glands. And people who have acne have a whole lot of active oil glands. And that usually happens when you're a teenager. So you guys have to deal with that. The oil glands become more active, and so you get more bacteria there, and you can develop acne. So the way to fix that is, one, to try and keep your skin clean, so not much bacteria can get down there. And there are drugs, you know, oils and stuff you can put on the acne that kill the bacteria. But that's one thing about getting older, is that kind of sebaceous glands dry up a little bit, and so you don't have to worry about pimples as much when you're older. That's the only thing good about being older. That was a joke. Wasn't very good, was it? Sorry if I offended your sense of age. Very stoic this morning. Anyway, guess what that is? It's a muscle. The muscle can pull on the hair and yank on it and lift the hair up. Every hair has its own little muscle. It's called the erector pili muscle. And so that pulls on the hair and the hair stands up. And that's it. Why do you want to make a hair stand up? Anyone have an idea?
To threaten predators.
Okay. Yeah. Animals will do this. When you scare an animal, I used to corner my cat, and I'd get him in the corner, and he'd stand up on his hair and make him look bigger. That didn't bother me. I'd still keep going. He liked it. Another reason you make your hair stand up is because it makes your fur coat thicker if you're an animal. So a thicker fur coat keeps the cold air away from the body. And so it's a way to keep warm if you're an animal out there. Of course, humans don't have much fur left, so that doesn't really help us much. But we still, when you get cold, you get goosebumps, and that's caused by this muscle contracting. So, what else do we got here? Well, we got blood vessels all over the place. And that brings blood in so all these cells can survive. They need oxygen and food and water that's brought by the blood. The little yellow things are nerves. And when we do the nervous system, we talk about how they work. But they're for sensing things. There's 4 sensations that your skin has. Can you guess what they are? 4 sensations that your skin has. Pain. Temperature. Actually, the temperature is 2 of them. There are hot sensors and there are cold sensors. So pain, hot, cold, pressure, touch. And there's actually 2 pressure sensors, so there's 5. There's light pressure sensors that are near the surface, and there's deep pressure sensors that are further down. I guess these might be deep pressure sensors. So the skin has a good scent, can sense the world, and then will send a message to the brain telling what's going on. So if somebody touches your finger, an electrical impulse goes from those nerves all the way to the brain and goes, "Hey, someone's touching my finger." And the brain goes, "Well, move your finger then. You don't want them touching your finger." And then it sends a message to the muscle, and you pull it away. What's that?
I said unless it's CP.
Oh, that's right. It's amazing that you know about that movie. That was way before your time. What else do we got here? We got the sweat glands. The sweat glands, this little curly-Q looking thing here is a sweat gland. And what happens is there's blood vessels nearby, and the sweat gland absorbs water from the blood vessels. And whenever you're hot, the water heats up, and the sweat gland kind of squeezes the water out, and the water will come off onto the surface of your skin. From there, the water will evaporate into the dry air. Now, the evaporation process takes with it a lot of energy. If you ever study physics, you probably do an experiment where you put some water onto a thermometer bulb, and as it evaporates, the temperature goes way down on the thermometer, and that's the cooling effect of sweat. So that's very important. You want to cool yourself off. There are a bunch of salts that come with the sweat. So when sweat gets on the surface of your skin and the water evaporates, the salt is left on the surface of your skin. The only way to replace that salt the salt won't go back in through the skin. The only way to replace it is to eat things with salt in it. So some people like ultra marathon runners have to make sure to eat salt during their marathon, or they'll lose all their salt. Once you lose all your salt, your body is in trouble, because your nervous system and your muscles use some of the stuff in salt to work. So if your muscles and nerves stop working, you'll die. So being low in salt is a problem. When y'all are y'all's age, you're very active, so you sweat a lot. But when you get older, like my age, you stop being so active because your muscles, because you've got bad knees or whatever it is. And that's when you have problems with too much salt, because you're still eating kind of the same diet you were 10 years ago, a very salty diet. There's pretty much salt in most of the foods that you eat. And then you're not sweating it out. And so what happens when you have extra salt in your body, your blood pressure goes way up. That's one of the problems that older people have, because they're not as active. If you stay active all your life, you won't get high blood pressure, most likely. Some people still do, but it's less odds of that. Anything else in there you see that I didn't talk about, or you have a question about? Down here at the bottom is the lower layer. It's called the subcutaneous layer. The subcutaneous layer, subcutaneous means below the skin. So the skin is actually the dermis and the epidermis. The subcutaneous layer is officially below the skin, but it's a layer of fat. And this layer of fat, that's adipose tissue, that keeps heat in. It's a very good it's not a good thermal conductor, which means heat has a tough time going through it, you see. So it keeps you warm. The subcutaneous layer. It also is where your food is stored. If you eat more food than you need, the extra food will all be turned into fat. Doesn't matter if it's sugar, if it's fat, if it's protein. If you don't need it right away, it'll be turned into fat, and it'll be stored mostly under your skin. And so people who are real big have eaten a lot of food in the past, and it's all stored under their skin now. The good part of that is, if you run out of food, let's say you're on a desert island somewhere without food, you can use all that food you have stored under your skin. And there are people known who have been stranded or something, live for 6 months without eating. As long as they have water, they can survive off the stored food. They have bad vitamin deficiencies, and that's problematic. And it also, like I say, it keeps in heat. So a real big person can do really well if it's cold outside. They've got a lot of insulation, you see. And it's true that the few people that they pulled out of the water when the Titanic went down, the few that survived that really icy water were the real fat people. All the skinny people froze real quick. They only were able to pull about, when the boats finally came back after the ship went down, they pulled about 10 or 15 people out of the water. The only ones that were living were the fat people. So, hey, yeah, there's good things to everything, I guess. It is tough on your heart, though. And by the way, some of the fat, not all the fat is stored under the skin. Some of the fat ends up getting stored in the arteries and stuff. That's another thing that can give you high blood pressure. If you're overweight, your inside your arteries and veins will have fat basically stored on the sides of the arteries and veins, and that can cause a problem. So here's a little skin flick. It's a video about the skin. That's what we used to call dirty movies back in the 70s. My jokes aren't doing too well this morning.
Our skin is the largest organ in the human body. An adult skin weighs nearly 10 pounds and has an area of 20 square feet. It keeps our blood and organs in and excess water out and provides a resilient protective covering for our bodies. Skin cools us down when we get hot and keeps us warm in the cold. When the body senses that it's getting overheated, glands in the skin release sweat, which evaporates and cools us. When we feel a chill, hairs stand upright to trap a layer of air next to the skin and keep us warm. Skin cells constantly renew themselves. The skin we see and touch is actually made of dead cells, which protect the living ones underneath. We shed 10 billion skin cells each day, and over the course of our lives, we'll shed more skin than a snake. But skin can't protect us from everything. The sun's ultraviolet rays can diminish its supple flexibility and destroy the pigment cells within the skin. The sun's damage can also cause skin cancer, the most common type of cancer in the United States. Moderating exposure to the sun and applying sunscreen can protect the skin from harm. We are thin-skinned, so cuts and bruises are a fact of life. When we get a cut, the skin has a mechanism for repairing itself. Platelets in the blood mobilize to form a clot, and white blood cells try to kill infection. A scab forms as a protective layer so cells deep in the skin can work to replace the lost cells. These are photos of a cut healing over the course of 4 weeks. Sometimes a cut is so severe that the skin can't repair itself. That's what happened to Sean Sarrazin. A large cut on his leg was not healing. Fortunately, medical science was able to step in and help. After 2 unsuccessful skin grafts, doctors tried to graft artificial skin to cover Sean's wound. A graft is healthy skin taken from another part of the body and surgically placed over the wound to help it heal. In an artificial skin graft, it comes from a petri dish. Cells from healthy skin are used to grow this artificial skin, which has no hair or sweat glands, but is teeming with young, vigorous cells. In Sean's case, an artificial skin graft worked, and he made a full recovery.
It's retaught my skin cells to grow in, when they haven't done that for a long time. And it's just been a remarkable process of healing for me.
Our skin is tough and resilient, and at the same time, delicate and fragile. So shielding it from harm should be a lifelong mission. Having healthy skin is an important part of having a healthy body. So we must protect it with the same diligence as it protects us.
He got bit by an alligator. They didn't show that, but I've seen a different video that he was on.
Is that why they were in the canoe?
That's why they were in a swamp, yeah.
Nociceptors are pain receptors which are located all over the body of animals, and they are free nerve endings in the skin. But there are so many of them that are extremely fine that pressing or causing pain anywhere on the body's surface will result in a sensation, of course. And these occur in all animals as far as we know.
I don't know why that was on there. Talking about pain sensors. Okay, so read through page 122, and I'll talk a little bit more of this chapter tomorrow, and then we'll start our IDs. I'll give you your ID sheet for this chapter. Okay?
Monday.
What? Monday. Tomorrow's Saturday?
Yeah.
Sweet.